Okay, let me start this video out by showing you guys the degree wheel. This is one of many, and this is the particular one I have. And if we look down here, it says valve timing events, or for valve timing events use black graduations. Well, they're not so much black as they are red. Can you see that? See how it says we got white 10, 20, 30, 40, da 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 da, and then you got red also, and then you get to the 90, and then it starts going down. At the 110 in white, you got 80 degrees, 70 degrees, all the way back down to 0 at the 180. So when I'm talking valve angle or degrees in relation to the valves, I'm going to be talking about these red markings. So with that said, I'm going to show you a dial gauge. Here's one of mine, and then here's one that I had to borrow. But anyways, those are the dial gauges. I'm gonna need some better light. Hold on, let me get a better light. Okay, so these are my dial gauges, and they usually don't come with a very long piece coming out the bottom. So I just used some aluminum welding rod and threaded it a 4x40 thread to extend this down in there so I can reach the top of the valve spring retainer, and you just set it on that. That's what we're going to be measuring off of. That's going to show the lift of the valves, or that's going to help us to see the lift of the valves on the dial gauges. So with that, how you're going to set this thing up is you're either going to need another dial indicator, and you're going to stick it down in there, mount it up here in some fashion, however you want. Stick your dial indicator way down in there. You're probably going to need a really long extension, or buy some dial indicators with really long extensions on them, because it's going to have to stick down in there and go from, fill the gap between the spark plug and the actual top of the piston, because you want it to rest on the top of the piston when you're at TDC. That way you can figure out your true TDC. And I say true TDC because these are, Buddy Club cam gears. They're good, name brand cam gears, but they're not exactly perfect. AEM, everybody's got slight discrepancies, but they're real close. Not to take anything away from AEM or Buddy Club or any of those companies. They're real close, and if you're not perfectly degreeing your cams, then it's not going to matter that much that they're just 2 degrees off, and just slapping them on, for the people that just slap stuff on, it doesn't really matter, they don't really care anyway. Okay, so here we are again. We're on true perfect TDC, and our cam gears do not line up. From the factory, they are not exactly perfect. I think this measured out to be, they're about 2 degrees off, which is not really a tooth. They're like half a tooth off. So I say true TDC because you can't go by this, and you sure can't go by the timing mark on the oil pump and timing belt gear there on the crank because the degree wheel is blocking it. So for us to find true TDC, like I said, either dial bore gauge or piston stop. And I just made my own piston stop. You can buy a piston stop, but I don't think that they're really worth what they cost. So, like I said, I made my own piston stop. All you got to do, the easiest way to do it is take an old spark plug, bust all the guts out of it, and then tap the inside for a bolt. That way you can turn this bolt inside of the spark plug up or down to make a piston stop. And I think this one about right there was a real good piston stop. So to get the degree wheel set, what you're going to do is put your piston stop in. You're going to rotate your degree wheel around one way, and you're going to kind of feel it, hear it, hit the piston stop and stop. And you're going to look on here and say, alright, it stopped at 5 degrees on this side. Then you're going to rotate it back around the other way, and it's going to stop at, we'll say, 6 degrees. So true TDC is you split the difference. So if it's 5 degrees on this side, 6 degrees on this side, then 5.5 degrees, and you should be at true TDC. So you're going to spin it around again, and you should be at 5.5 degrees here, and then spin it back the other way, and you should be 5.5 degrees here. If you're 5.5 degrees on both sides, then that means that you have found true TDC. So when the piston is all the way up at the very center of its upstroke, that TDC is going to be right on 0 degrees. And so you're going to either move this indicator, just kind of bend it a little bit to get it right where you need it, or you can loosen your bolt here and move your degree wheel a little bit and then tighten it back down. But when you're tightening this down, either with an impact or wrench socket, however, the degree wheel tends to move just ever so slightly. So it's usually easier to just go ahead and tighten this down and bend this. That way this won't move. You just move the little indicator here. And while we're talking about that, I just took some welding rod, bent it up, mounted it behind this bolt, and made a pointer out of it. So you're going to have to do that. You can, use a bolt here like I did, or you can use one of these bolts up here, or you can use this bolt. Don't matter, as long as you're got it hard mounted to where it's not going to move just freely and easily, and it points. It makes a good pointer on your degree wheel. So after telling you all how to mount this thing and set up your degree wheel and your dial indicators, you're gonna want to find some way to hold your dial indicators. I got one of these stands here, and it's about maxed out. I could stand to use or upgrade to a bigger one, but you can see how I have that set up just to hold this gauge positively so it don't move and give me false readings. And I didn't have another one of those, so I just made a static mount for this one out of some car stock. It's not sheet metal either, just some metal that I had lying around. You know, we got that all set up there, and I showed you where you set these up on the lifters. And then I still have my rocker arms out for everything except for my number 1 cylinder. I still have those set up. Still have VTEC locked in like I showed in my last video. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all the setup of the degree wheel and the dial indicators. Let me show you running through these valve timing events. Okay, so when we're running through our valve timing events, we want to take and move our degree wheel by turning our crank, and we're going to watch these dial indicators. This one's finicky on me. Come on. So we're going to watch these dial indicators while we turn our crank. And when this gets to 50 thousandths lift, we're going to stop and notate where we're at. Write down our measurements on our degree wheel. This sucker ain't turning too easy right now. It's cold, so it makes it hard to turn it. And then the dang thing bouncing around. Oh yeah, I'm real close. I might be half a degree over. So alright, so now we know, we can see our exhaust is on our 50 thousandths mark. We're going to come down here, look at our degree wheel, and we can see that it is on 38. Yeah, that's probably about how much I passed the 50 thousandths by. Was, yeah, so we're at 38. So what you're going to do is write down your 38 at your exhaust opening event starts at 38 degrees, and we're after top dead center. So you write that down, and then you turn it again, and this degree wheel's or dial indicator is going to continue to go up, and then it's going to stop, and then it's going to start coming back down, and then we're going to stop on 50 thousandths again. This is going to be our close event. Passed it a little. So you can either go all the way around again, or you can back up and take another run at it. Yeah, we're there. Okay, so our exhaust valve is closing at 2 degrees before top dead center. And mind you, when I did this the very first time, I had these set on 0, so my numbers are different now than when I did it when I had everything zeroed out, because I've already adjusted my cam gears a little bit for what I'm looking for. And let me say this to you guys, every engine's different, every cam isn't exactly the same, so all of y'all's numbers, if y'all do this on your engine, isn't going to be exactly the same as mine. I'm using a factory B16A2 cam in my head for now, because yeah, I just want to try this out and didn't really have the money to dump on some cams. And yeah, so keep that in mind. This is just kind of a show you guys the idea and the theory behind doing this and how to do this yourself. So we see our valve closing event is at 2 degrees. We're going to write that down, and then we're going to move on to our intake. And our intake has already started to move because we're about to start the intake stroke. So our piston, our degree wheel is telling us our piston is almost at TDC. Our exhaust valve is closing at 2 degrees before TDC, and our intake valve is starting to open, so we're looking at some overlap right there. Damn. I'm going to bump this until I get it at 50 thousandths. Oh, damn, just passed it. But I know, because I've already done this, what my degree wheel should say at 50 thousandths. I should be at 1 degree. So now I know my intake valve is starting to open. We're at 50 thousandths lift at 1 degree after top dead center. So our piston is now starting to come back down the cylinder, and we're going to suck intake air and fuel in. So now we go ahead and rotate it around all the way, and we're going to watch for our intake closing event. Okay, now we're starting to come back down, and we're going to stop on 50 thousandths. Damn, I passed it. So I'm going to back up and give it another run here. Some people say don't back up, always go in one direction, and yeah, that's a good idea, but it's time consuming. And for this video, I'm going to back up. So now we can see that our intake is closing at, am I getting this on camera? 43 degrees. And where are we at here? There's bottom dead center, and so we've passed that. So we're at 43 degrees after bottom dead center. So our piston has already started to come back up 43 degrees before our intake has started to close, but it's 50 thousandths away from closing. So, you know, that's not a huge deal breaker. And I'm going to go over like the main reason for doing this here in just a second. So now we've got our exhaust open and close event in relation to the degrees of the crank, and we've got our intake open and close event in relation to degrees of the crank. So now that you know that, you can do the rest of this math, and what the rest of this math is going to tell you is you're going to be able to check your duration, your center lines of your cams, your installed center lines, and ultimately with all that you're going to find your lobe separation angle. So why do we do all this work with degreeing these cams? Well, I mean, number one reason in doing this work, degreeing these cams, is that you can see, oh, my cam gears, either factory or aftermarket, are off just a little bit from what the degree wheel says, and you know what ideally perfect should be. So you know you need to compensate for that. If you've milled or decked your block or head, you're changing, you know, valve timing and lift events and whatnot there, so you need to compensate for if you did that. if you've decked your block or milled your head, you're going to have some valve clearance issues possibly. Like I had stated before, this block is bone stock, never been decked, but I've always checked it, and every time I checked it, it's flat. I can't get a 1,000th feeler gauge under my straight edge, so that's saying we're still flat. I checked the bottom of my head, and that's staying flat, so I haven't had a need to mill or deck either the block or the head. So I know that I'm not going to have a valve clearance problem on this engine. But that will be one of the reasons to do all of this. Is you can also check piston to valve clearance. I'll go over that here in a little bit. You can check TDC against what's on the valve or the oil pump and the gear that's behind here. You can see if those are 100% accurate or if they're off a little bit. And you can time everything, tailor everything as far as the valve timing goes to suit your specific needs or desires for the engine. Like if you're wanting drag racing maximum torque, you can adjust for that. Or if you're wanting a real long power band, you can adjust for that. I'll go over that a little bit more here in a minute. But our main purpose for doing all this is to check and know our duration, to check and know our center lines, and get our installed center lines, so then we can find our lobe separation angle. And that's probably the most important part about this, is the lobe separation angle, because that's the angle that you can adjust and tailor it for, either more torque or more power band, or your specific desires for your engine. So let me show you this much of finding all this out, the math that's concerned with it. Here's formulas for it. So if you take your open event plus your close event plus 180 degrees, that's going to give you your duration. You're going to have a duration for the exhaust and a duration for the intake. So you got to do that twice, unless you're single banging. I mean, you're still going to have different durations, but not different cam. They're all ground into one cam. And then with your duration, you divide it by 2 to find your center line. And then you take your center line and subtract your closest to TDC numbers. So like I was saying earlier, how our exhaust was 3 degrees and our intake was 1 degree. So those that are the very closest to TDC, we're going to minus them, unless you're on the opposite sides, then you're going to add them. But doing that will give you your installed center lines. So you're going to have duration and a center line of the cam, but then you're going to have an installed center line of the cam, which is what it's at installed into the engine and the head. So in that, you could take your installed center line plus your installed center line, divide it by 2, and that's going to give you your lobe separation angles in degrees. And you can adjust this using your cam gears. Like I had stated that I'd already moved these. I've retarded my exhaust cam 2 degrees. Yeah, you can kind of see that. Not great, but you can kind of see it. And I've advanced my intake cam 2 degrees to give me a lobe separation angle that I wanted for this, that I believe that I want for this engine. And you know, I'll know for sure whether that's what I really want or not once I get driving it, once I get it on the dyno, see what kind of power band I've got, you know, what kind of numbers I'm making, and how it feels on the track once I get it on the track. But let's talk about the lobe separation angles a little bit. So if your lobe separation angle is tighter, which means they're closer together, the symptoms you're going to have is you're going to have increased torque, you're going to have better scavenging, you're going to have higher cylinder pressures, higher cranking compression, you're going to have a higher effective compression, but you're going to have a potential for knock, a higher potential for knock, and you're going to have more overlap. But in having all of that, you got to sacrifice a little bit. So you're going to decrease your power band, you're going to decrease the vacuum, overall vacuum of the engine, you're going to lose a little idle stability, and you're going to lose piston to valve clearance. So if we go, holding the camera with one hand is kind of tough. If we go wider, so that was tight that I just went over. If we go wider with our lobe separation angle, everything I stated is going to be in reverse. We're going to increase our power band, increase our vacuum, increase our idle stability, and increase our piston to valve clearance. But we're sacrificing, so we're going to decrease our torque, our scavenging, our cylinder pressure, our cranking compression, our effective compression, we're decreasing our potential for knock, and we're decreasing overlap. So you've got to kind of figure out, you know, what you want, what you're looking for, what's going to be the purpose of this, of the engine. To know, well, do I want to gain this and lose that, or do I want to gain that and lose this? Because that's what you're doing with your lobe separation angle. And being a dual cam, we can really play with this, because we can move one either advanced or retarded and leave the other one where it is, or vice versa. So there's all of that. So I've showed you the math. I haven't actually given you numbers, but I've given you formulas, and I believe that I explained it well enough for y'all to understand. If y'all need more explanation, or you want me to actually plug some numbers in there, let me know in the comments, and either I'll do another video, or I'll just put the formula in the comments with actually numbers plugged into it. I told you in the last video I was going to show you another way to check your piston to valve clearance. So this is the more expensive and tedious way to check your piston to valve clearance. There's only a few degrees in which your valves are going to be close to your piston, and that's going to be up around the TDC area, you know, when your piston's the uppermost part of the cylinder. So if you, let's say, start at 20 degrees before top dead center, that's where your exhaust valve should be the closest. So you take this, turn it, put your pointer, put 20 degrees on your pointer, and you can do this without test springs, but test springs make it way easier. If you have test springs installed, you're just going to go in here and you're going to push on that valve until you feel it contact the piston, and you're going to watch your dial indicator while you're doing that. and you're going to say it's set. Well, let me give you a better example. Say we're at 70 thousandths with the valve mostly closed, and we push it down, it contacts the piston, and it moved to 20 thousandths. So at 20 degrees on the degree wheel, we know that we started at 70 and it touched at 20, so that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 thousandths of clearance that we have between the valve and the piston at 20 degrees. So then what you're going to do is move it a few degrees, say 17. Let's move our degree wheel and our pointer, let's line it up to 17, and we're going to repeat it. And it's probably going to move down a little bit, but at the same time our piston moved up a little bit more, so we're going to push on our retainer there and see how much difference we have then. So if you check, you can check at 20 degrees, 17 degrees, 14 degrees, 10 degrees, 7 degrees, 4 degrees, and then at TDC. And then you want to check a few of them after TDC, like 2 degrees, 4 degrees, 7 degrees, and just write down the differences, or you can zero out your gauge every time. You can set your gauge to where, alright, I'm at 20 degrees, let me take my wheel here and turn it to 0 and then push my valve, and then you won't have to do any calculations or math. It'll pretty much be from 0 to whatever you push it and it stops. That's going to be your clearance at that degree mark. So you do that for the exhaust. You'll do pretty much the same thing for the intake, except for you'll start on the intake before top dead center just a little bit. Say we start at 7, we do 4, we do 2, and then we go to TDC. And then after TDC, you're going to do a few more all the way up to 20 or 25 degrees. Checking this. The general rule of thumb is you want, what is it, a minimum of 80 thousandths clearance all across the board on the intake side. So you don't really want it any tighter than 80 thousandths, or you're really risking slapping your piston with your valve. Especially if you take account valve float or something like that was to happen, then your chances of them smacking each other are even higher. So 80 thousandths minimum on intake and 100 thousandths minimum on the exhaust side. And that'll be the more tedious and expensive way of checking your piston to valve, only because you have to have a degree wheel and you have to have at least one dial indicator to do it this way. Whereas using the clay, you don't need that and you don't need the dial indicator. You just spin it around a couple of times and then take your head back off and see how much the clay got smushed, and then you measure that with calipers or micrometers, however exact you want to be. It is up to you. So there you have it. I've covered everything that I can think of that was pertinent information for you guys. If there's something more that you want to know about this process, hit me up, shoot something in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back with you. I'm pretty good at replying to people's comments, especially when they have questions. And I'd appreciate a subscribe and a like, and I'll see what I can't do to make some more interesting and cool content for you guys. And yeah, we'll just see about having a good time together. Maybe I can finally get this finished and in the car and make it to a track and have some fun. Alright guys, thanks for watching.